Okay, it is week 5. I know you're wishing I said week 6, aren't you? Because then we'd be getting close to being finished. But no, but we have made it to week 5 at least. All right, so let's take a look at where we are. And congratulations for making it this far. This is, I must say, not an easy class that Indiana Tech has put together, as you're well aware. This is a lot. This is some sophisticated stuff that you guys are doing and putting together, and you should be pretty proud of yourself for making it this far. All right, so I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to, let's see, start with Module 5. Okay, so Module 5, let's just kind of walk it through as we normally do. Make sure that we're not missing anything. I'm going to go over some APA stuff. I've had some questions from several of you about this or that, or how do I use this or that. So let's look at the course pacing. Of course, it's Tuesday, so that means that probably you have already completed some of these things already. You probably have already been drafting project 3 all along because it's part of the project that you've already been working on. Even if you don't have a draft on paper or on your computer, it's probably been marinating in your head for a little while. And so you kind of have a draft going in there and you're starting to think through, how am I going to use this? How am I going to use this? Maybe now that you have done the interview itself, you've gone back to some of the sources that you've collected, the secondary sources, and thought to yourselves, okay, I did that matrix, but now I'm seeing some holes that I didn't see before. Maybe I need to go back to that rubric, that matrix, not for a grade, but just to look at it and go, okay, where do I still need some information so that I can write this thing coming up soon? So we are kind of looking through how this all works. So let's just kind of move forward here. Okay, so the first thing that you encounter, of course, is this lovely open review. Writing is a process, and if you've tried looking at it, you know it's somewhat complicated because when you open it, it doesn't take you to this. It takes you to this Writing Center University of Wisconsin-Madison site, which is very good, but you then are faced with, well, what am I supposed to do now? So my suggestion with this, and this isn't an article that I have required, this is from Indiana Tech when they put this course together, is to go up to right here where there's a drop-down menu under for students and notice the things that are available to these students and that we are trying to direct you to. There's a lot of interesting stuff, but the one that's going to be most useful to you is the Writer's Handbook. So click on the Writer's Handbook. And one little note here that I wanted to point out, this right here, you often will see this, and you probably haven't even paid attention to it, but anytime you see the Creative Commons attribution, that or this little symbol, CC, Creative Commons, that means that any of the things in it are free to use for you without having to worry about being sued, for instance. So any of this information is useful to you for that. Okay, so some stuff that you might see here that will be useful to you: academic and professional writing, writing process and structure, improving your writing style, grammar and punctuation, and citing. We are really concentrating a lot on APA citing. I'm going to show you a video about how to do that a little bit more later. But you might also want to take a look at some of these other things, like writing process and structure, right? And notice that when you click on it, then you're going to always see these. Down here are the options. Getting started, creating an argument, working with sources, drafting, revising, finishing, and writing collaboratively. So some of those might be very useful to you as you're trying to figure out, what am I doing this particular paper? Like, how am I going to do this? The other thing that's useful, of course, is the citing part. We give you several ways in which you can look up how to cite your sources and your interviews. This is another option. I'm going to get rid of this, and we're going to go back over to the beginning, because the next source that they give you is a similar one, in which if you open it, you get a grammar guide. And again, it takes you to the menu, and so you're looking at it and thinking, what am I supposed to do with this? we'd like you to pick something that's useful to you. And all of you have sort of different strengths and weaknesses in your writing, of course, right? So some of you might want to look over here at this grammar guide, 120 mistakes you must avoid in 2024. So with some exercises, checking your grammar. If you know you have problems with commas or run-ons, then there's some things over here for you to click on. There's even exercises that you can do if you know, I have this problem, I'm not sure what to do with it. So take a look at these different things in the English grammar site and check out what might be useful to you. So that's what that one is there for. This is a kind of a review week. Collect all your things that you know are still problematic. Let's kind of fine tune them. Now, this next thing, we're going to move into APA format. Now, some of you are still sort of afraid of APA format. So I wanted to do a bit of a review. So I'm opening up the OWL source, and as a reminder, OWL stands for Online Writing Lab, and it's actually put together by Purdue, but most universities end up using it because it's pretty comprehensive. As you can see, it's a free site, and every time you have a free site, you know that you or me, we are the products, and so of course there's pop-up ads that are driving us crazy, but it's still pretty comprehensive. So I wanted to point out a couple things on this APA stuff. So one, I'm going to do, we'll get back to this paper here in a minute, but I wanted to point out, well, hold on, let me go over to, I'm going to back up a little bit here because we're past where I want you to be. I want to go to the style introduction because some of you don't really know, why do we have MLA and APA? What's the difference? So here's what APA stands for. MLA you've probably been working with since you were in high school, and that actually stands for Modern Language Association, which of course you probably never have to care about. But MLA is used in humanities and in English anywhere. So like high school, college, you run into MLA a lot. Now, a lot of you are going to be moving into other applications, and so you're going to be introduced to APA, and we want you to be familiar with it too. It actually stands for American Psychological Association, so APA, which, you know, some of you are in psychology, so that would make sense to you, but you're not the only ones that will use this. And I will keep getting rid of these stupid ads that pop up. So who uses this APA stuff, right? Social sciences, most commonly. You'll also find it often in business settings. And this morning, for example, I gave a white paper presentation to a leadership group, and in that we used APA format. So a lot of business people and business applications as well. So that's something else you may be considering. If you're in nursing, eventually there's a medical format that you'll learn, but you'll also often begin by using APA format. Okay, so that's who uses it. Now let me go back to where I started here and kind of talk through the difference between the APA citations. And I've talked about them a bit in the past, but I wanted to show you some examples. All right, so here's an example here. I'm going to kind of see this one here. In APA, the major difference are two in the citations. One is that you see more commas, and two is that you see the dates. Now, not the whole date, just usually the year. So in a citation, there are three components for APA. The last name of the author, if it's available. In this case, we have Jones. The date that the article was published, in this case, 1998. And the page number, if it's available. In this case, you see it over here. It's P.199, so page 199. Now, notice that you're probably going, wait a minute, I'm used to seeing them all in the citation in a different way. And oftentimes you'll see them at the end of a quote, you'll see a parenthetical citation, and it'll say Jones, comma, 1998, comma, P.199, and then the close quotations. And that is absolutely correct. This is just another way of showing it to you, remembering that you can use the citation information in any way that it makes sense to the information you're trying to convey to your readers. So if it makes sense to do it in this way, because it's a smoother reading style, then you can. So this would be read, according to Jones, 1998, quote, students often had difficulty using APA style, especially when it was their first time, close quote, citation page 199, period. Okay, so you could do it that way. They've given you a couple of different ways you could do it. There's not a particularly one right way, as long as you have those three components, last name of the author, year, date, page number, as long as all of those are there and they're all in a place where the reader is looking at it and going, oh, okay, I get what they're saying. This quote came from this source on this page number and it was written by this person. That is what you're aiming for. So here is an example of what I was talking about that's more of the traditional sense where it's all stuck together in the parenthetical quotation, but you can do it in other ways. Okay, so let me go over here to this one. See where it says APA sample paper? I'm going to show you a video. So some of you prefer learning via video and some of you just prefer reading. I want to kind of connect with all of you. This sample paper, you're going to see a couple of different things I want to point out. I'm just going to pull this up. Notice it says APA 7. And if you scroll down, APA 7 Professional. Those are slightly different. And one is more used in a business sense. So I'm going to actually pull up the business one. Both of them are just fine. But probably more of you will end up using the business option than just the regular one. So let's take a look at what it might be. So when you open up the sample paper, you're going to see that there's a lot of colors, right? Your real papers aren't going to have those colors. These colors are the annotations or explanations for the paper as we're moving along. And so you're going to see a lot of that as we move through here. So like, notice in this sample paper, you're going to have a cover page. That's a big difference between MLA. MLA doesn't use a cover page. It just kind of starts right off on the first page. You jump right into the paper. APA is a more scientifically oriented stuff and psychologically social science stuff. So you're going to see a cover page because it looks cleaner. So notice over here, you're going to see all the comments that kind of walk you through exactly what am I seeing here, right? I'm seeing what's on the cover page. Well, it's going to tell you exactly what's on the cover page and what should I see. Notice that another big difference with APA is that after the cover page, sometimes on the bottom of the cover page, you're going to see a centered heading called abstract. And that basically is just a summary, a quick summary of the paper. So if you are doing research, and some of you have done research already because you've been finding secondary sources, as you looked for your secondary sources in the library, you were gratified probably to see abstracts because that means that the paper, you didn't have to open the entire darn paper to see if it was a good source for you. You could look at the abstracting summary and go, oh yes, this is exactly what I'm looking for, or nope, that is not what I thought it was at all. Abstracts are very useful for research. So that's kind of what you're doing is just saying this is the abstract, this is the summary. Notice at the bottom here, you're going to see a little section called keywords. The keywords, so if you've done research, you know that librarians, they organize things by keywords, right? Or even if you're on Google, if you're searching for something, you're typing in keywords and then it's popping up stuff that fits it, right? The keywords are your suggestions for how this particular paper should be filed if it were in a library. So like, what are the main themes? Those are the keywords, okay? All right, so then you go down to page 3. Notice that we put the title here again. We have the page number and we just kind of start this whole thing off. Oh, page number. This here is the title, Branching Paths, right? Oops. The page number, you're going to see 2 different kinds of page numbers in APA. The first one is this variety that has the title and the number of the page. So notice that a novel teacher evaluation model, that's the title. So in MLA, you had your last name and the page number. In APA, you see the title of the paper and the page number. Or you often just see, in the more modern sense, you don't even see this, this is what we call a running head up here. You don't even see that anymore. You just see page numbers. So just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so that's actually more common at this point in time. Okay, so then we're going to kind of scroll down through this paper. You see a lot of citations in here and dates and page numbers, but you also see something that's more frequent in APA. Let's see if I can find one here for you. Here we go. You see bolded headings. So the bolded headings are just kind of the sections of the paper, and they're kind of helping the reader to transition and find things easily in APA. So you see in APA a lot more paragraph headings, not paragraph headings, but like section headings. So as you're thinking through, I have 3 sections of my paper, or 4 sections of my paper, then you put in headings, and that makes it easy to find. So you can see these have headings. Meta-analysis 1, meta-analysis 2. They're not the same headings. Yours will be whatever is relevant to your particular paper. Okay, so that's just an example of what you might see. And then another big difference in APA and MLA is scrolling to the bottom, really far down here. I'll stop. There's some pictures. Sometimes you use pictures. You'll see those. They also are cited, just like a quote. But when we get to the bottom, okay, so here we have the bottom. Here are your sources, and they, it's similar to MLA. The MLA you see will be called works cited. In APA, it's called references. And notice they are also alphabetized by the last name of the author, or in the case of the second one, there is no author, but they're using American Association of University Professors as the author, so it's still alphabetized by author. But you'll notice that the way it's put together here in APA is slightly different than MLA. So make sure that if you don't know how to do that, you look it up, because you see the date here is in a different location than it is for MLA. So do look that up. You can do that also in the L. Let me go back and show you how to do that. So at the top of the APA section, so we are in APA. You can actually see right here, up here at the top in this gray box, this is a website separately called Citation Machine. You can go there if you prefer to go straight there, or you can just see, okay, what is my source? This one gives you only the 4 main ones that are used by you guys: website, book, journal article, and online film. If you have a different kind of source that you're trying to cite, just go over to Citation Machine. You can do it by clicking over here. And they will give you 200 different types of sources instead of just the normal ones, right? So let's say you have a website, because that's what most of you do, and then you will type in the URL, that's the www.http, blah, 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 blah. That's that whole line that you copy and paste right here, and then you'll tell it to cite, and it will put it in a citation for you. So pretty easy to do. With a little bit of playing around, you can figure out how to do that. Okay, so again, that's the OWL source. The OWL source right here is actually linked. So if you don't remember that, but if you don't want to go through all the clicking to find it, it's really easy to go to Google and type in OWL. Remember, that's Online Writing Lab, Purdue, and then whatever you want. So APA, and it will pop it right up for you. Okay. All right. So in the discussion board, we didn't have one last week, but we do this week. The discussion board is going to be the following: your Project 3 essay rough draft. Okay. Notice it should be at least 500 words. If you don't know how to do that, pop something up here. I'm going to just open our Project 3 thing just to show you a sample. Okay, so let's pretend this is your paper and you're wondering, how many words is this, the whole thing? Well, you can go up under Review to the top, see that? And then if you go over to the left and down, you will see the little thing called word count. You can double click on that, and it's going to tell you you have 3 pages. You have 785 words. There you go, right? If I just wanted to know how many words were in this first paragraph, I would highlight it and then click word count, and it will tell me there are 72 words in that first paragraph. Okay, so that's how you tell where things are. Okay, so again, if you're in a Microsoft Word, go up to the top, click on review, and then go over here to word count. And that's how you tell if you've made it long enough. And of course, when you submit it, it automatically counts the words and tells me how many words you have. So keep that in mind, that when it says at least 500 words, it's easy for me to know if there are. So again, your rough draft is here. The rough draft is you putting together all the information from your interview and from the secondary sources you've collected, and you're putting it all together into a paper now, right? What are you going to be commenting on? These 3 items here. Number 1, does the author have a clear thesis statement, and does it meet the assignment requirements? Okay, so that's the first thing. Number 2, do the body paragraphs have clear topic sentences? And just to recap, a topic sentence is most often the very first sentence in a paragraph, and it tells the topic of the paragraph, right? Thus, topic sentences. So it will kind of give the reader a heads up, like this is what the topic, or this is what this paragraph is about. This is how it connects to the main idea of the paper. It's helping the reader to move along in the same steps that you're hoping they get from your thought process. Okay, so do the body paragraphs have clear topic sentences? Is the idea adequately supported? Are you using your sources? Do they all support the idea that you're making here? And then number 3, does the author take care to avoid common errors when integrating secondary sources, quotes, paraphrases, summaries, APA stuff, right? Remember those things we talked about, annoying ways people use sources. Are they avoiding that stuff? Because, hey, we don't like that stuff. It's ineffective. And then, of course, you do have the live tech reflection, which is on what we're talking about right now. So once you've gotten through those, that is going to take you through what we have for this paper. Now, I promised you a couple of other things as we kind of think through APA and interviews. There's still some questions that I'm getting from a lot of you that I thought we need to sort of remedy some of this information that we're missing. So I'm going to play 2 things. One of them is still this interview thing. Now, this is the interview, and we're talking about a different kind of interview, but one that's more relevant to you guys, and that you all have to go through job interviews, right? So how is the interview that you're doing, how is that helpful? How is that skill set helpful to you? Well, let's find out.
Contrary to popular belief, the most important parts of the interview, preparing for it. I want you all to think back to your first big interview. Think back to the one that made you excited, to the one where you waited anxiously for them to call. What was it like walking up to the interview, shaking their hands, feeling the spotlight beaming on you as they asked, "Tell me about yourself"? Were there butterflies? Did you stumble on some words? Maybe you completely nailed it or tanked it. You're not alone. You see, 4 years, fresh out of undergrad, I was preparing for my first big interview. This was one I had come to idolize after watching and learning from my college mentors before me. I researched the office where the job was. I put on my power outfit, and I rehearsed many times exactly how I would tell them about myself. And on the day of the interview, it was perfect. I left beaming. I saw the heads nodding, the pens scratching across the interview forms. I left my thank you notes at the door, and a day later, I got the offer. Fortunately, a few weeks in, I found myself in a place where I was completely burning out. I was in a job where I was micromanaged, overwhelmed, and couldn't build a boundary between work and home. I began to dread coming in the mornings, and after 10 months, I left. I took a couple steps back to ask, how did I end up here? The parts of my job that I loved, where I was using my strengths, only accounted for a small part of what I was responsible for. And for the rest, I was faced with a lot of challenge, with little guidance and support, and that caused me a lot of anxiety in a place where I thought I'd be great. But then I remembered my interview. They asked, how do you handle criticism? Of course, I told them I'm great at it. I want them to hire me. And they asked, how do you like planning and logistics? And I told them that I'm good at that, but honestly, I hate that stuff. Can you blame me, though? I was flattered enough to even receive the interview. So of course I ended up telling them exactly what they wanted to hear. This excitement of his first job, his first offer, just blindly drew me in. It was then that I realized the idea of this job was more important to me than advocating for what I needed to be happy. Now, the past few years as a career advisor, I've coached hundreds of students on how not to make the same mistake that I did. So today, I invite you all to learn 3 strategies that I use to teach my students so they can feel powerful in knowing exactly what they need and knowing how to ask for it. These 3 strategies are knowing your non-negotiables, identifying your strengths, and being able to find alignment through research. How do you even start to find your non-negotiables? By tuning into the activities and the surroundings that bring you joy. Do you absolutely need a job where you're collaborating with others, or do you work better on your own? Do you absolutely need the hustle and bustle of a city and a Target readily available at the end of your day? Or do you prefer the peace and quiet of a rural setting? Tune into what is necessary for your well-being within and outside of your job. For example, this job that I accepted brought this pizza-loving Brooklyn girl down to a small college town in North Carolina. I was a fish out of water. As soon as I got there, traveled an hour in every direction to just try and find a good slice of pizza. And at best, I got an okay crust and some lousy sauce. So believe me when I say, it took a long time for me to adjust. Not just to that, but the slower pace of life and the lack of public transportation. This made me realize more than ever, my priorities need to include what makes me happy outside of work too. Your non-negotiable list should be the things that wake you up and bring you to work in the morning, and should be the things that you look forward to when you leave. Some of you may have done this process already. Continue to dig deep and think about what are your own priorities. This is how we connect your motivation to meaningful experience. We need to learn how to listen to what motivates us, and we have to ask for that. The next step here is then to identify your strengths. Knowing what you're good at is the foundation to ask for what you need in those non-negotiables. How do you find your strengths? Think about the compliments that you have received that have stuck with you. Think about how your best friend would describe you to someone who's never met you before. Hidden in these answers are the authentic strengths that you get to use in your career because you're naturally good at them. When I was a student, I was once told, Ashley, you always have a story to tell. In that compliment, I found strength in my communication, and this motivated me to find a career where I could educate and empower others. It's important to take note, you may have some idealized strengths along with your actual strengths. That happened to be a large challenge of what I faced in my unpleasant job several years ago. I used every opportunity I could to uncover my strengths with experience. Every volunteer opportunity, every side project, every new responsibility I took the time to assess what I was loving and what were the elements that were missing. In that process, I was empowered to make my own happiness. And I learned how to ask for help, which as a native New Yorker, I could still be too prideful to do. As I learned each new strength about myself, I made sure to include that in my non-negotiable list too. Now that you've taken an internal audit of your non-negotiables and your strengths, we're already at the final step, which is finding alignment through research. Alignment is all about matching your internal needs to the opportunities around you. You can find alignment starting with research. So you can gather information online about the jobs that you want to pursue in the future. You can talk to current professionals that are doing exactly what you want to be doing. You can network and even test out some new responsibilities you may want to add on your own resume. Once you get a sense of what's out there in the world and what you have, you must draw a comparison. Draw the dotted lines between your own non-negotiable list and that job posting in front of you. You notice that something is missing, you have two options ahead of you. One, prepare to advocate in that interview. Make sure the people across from you know how important that element is to your own success. Or two, take a step back and realize this may not be the job for you. And that's okay. Don't settle for anything less than what you need to be happy. I got to put my own advice to the test 2 years ago when I interviewed for my current role as a career advisor. In this interview, I advocated for a space where I can be independent, creative, and have a culture of coworkers who could be my family too. These, by the way, are all on top of my non-negotiable list. And in that interview, when they asked me, how do you handle criticism? I answered honestly. And I was proud of myself for being self-aware in the answers I gave them. And then when they asked me, how do you like logistics and planning? I acknowledged my skill, but then I redirected them to my strengths, always pointing them back to the way that I bring value. So when they called me with that job offer, I'll never forget how they said it. They said, Ashley, we already see you as part of our career family. I'd like to offer you the job. The fact that they used the same words from my own non-negotiables back to me when making that offer showed me I had found a place that would value those non-negotiables, would utilize my strengths, and that we had found great alignment to what they needed and what I was offering. So now, as you all prepare for your next big interview, I want you all to remember the most important part happens before you arrive and with yourself. Take the time to align your strengths and your non-negotiables to all the big dreams ahead of you. Confident and proud of all that you have learned about yourself. And with that, you'll master the art of the interview. Thank you.
Okay, so it's a little off of our topic for today, but I wanted you to think through how you could utilize the skills that you're using to do interviews to kind of turn back upon your own thought process in your own job, because most of you are in college, let's face it, because you want a better job, right? Like all of us are looking for what's the next step? How can we improve on that? So I wanted you to think about that. All right, so we're going to end with this. This is a rather long video, but some of you actually need it. And it's going to go through APA much more in depth with the seventh edition, which is what we just talked about. But it will talk through specifically interviews and personal communication and how to do that using citations. So some of you don't need this, so I wanted to put it last, because if you already are familiar with the APA, you can jump off and do just fine. If you want something more in depth, stick around.
today we're going to continue on our quest of covering all the different types of references that fall under APA 7th edition. But today I want to talk about the odd ones. The odd ones out, the oddballs. What might those be? Those are your citations that don't fall under your traditional categories like a book would or a journal or a web page, something you find online. Things that I'm listing on the screen right now. These are what I want to show you how to format because while they're very similar to every type of reference list entry you're going to create, they all vary a little bit. And I also know how nice it is to have that verification of someone telling you exactly what you're supposed to do, aka the bread and butter of my YouTube channel. Okay, so first things first, odd citation or not, all reference list entries are made up of those same 4 elements. If you've been with me for a while, you probably have these burned into your brain at this point, but I'm going to cover them quickly for those of you that are new. So those 4 elements that you're always going to look for is going to be the author, the date, the title, and the source in that order. Now, because we're talking about odd citations, I want to point out a few things about these elements. When it comes to the author element, that simply means the creator of whatever type of source you're trying to cite. So this could be the editor, the photographer, the speaker, the presenter, whoever created that source that you're trying to cite is considered the author. The date is self-explanatory. The title is always going to be the title of the work you're trying to reference. And then the source will always be where you can locate that reference. So if someone's reading your paper and they want to look up where you found this information, that's where the source information is going to go. But with that little bit of understanding, let's go ahead and jump into the example portion because I find that's where the magic happens. That's where you really understand what I'm talking about. So here we go. And
a CRM shouldn't weigh your budget down. It should lift your teams up. A CRM shouldn't hide feeds.
hello, welcome to my laptop. So to kick off these examples, let me explain what you're looking at. So first things first, highlighted in yellow is going to be the type of source that we're referencing. Then what I've done is I've created a template of what that odd citation should contain. And so if you'll note, the reference list template is color-coded based on those 4 elements I covered just a second ago. Then underneath, I've created an example that applies that template as well as an in-text citation to wrap it up nice and neatly. And now let's go ahead and get started. And I'm going to zoom in here because I know how hard it is to see these from afar. Anyways, the first type of odd citation I want to talk about is a personal communication. And if you're not familiar with what a personal communication is, it's simply a source that you want to include in your paper that doesn't contain a source. In other words, there's nowhere for the reader to look it up if they wanted to. So the criteria for a personal communication is, well, you're not going to include that reference list entry because the purpose of a reference list entry is to give the reader the option to look up the source. Instead, you're going to include an in-text citation. And so I'm going to say right now, as a rule of thumb, if you do want to include a personal communication in your paper, please know that that does not count towards your reference list entries. You can absolutely use the information if it enhances your paper, but it does not count as a formalized reference. But some examples of a personal communication would be things like an email, maybe a text message, a personal interview, or perhaps a live speech that's not uploaded online, maybe an unrecorded classroom lecture, or even a recorded lecture, but it's not anywhere online that you can link into your reference list entry. You might include a memo, a letter, so on and so forth. The list is endless. Again, there is no source. But now let's look at the template for that in-text citation because it differs from your traditional in-text citation just a little. So you still want to include the author element to start, but here you want to go ahead and include not just the author's last name, but if you have that first initial, go ahead and include it there. Then, if you'll know, the word personal communication is included in the in-text citation. And then lastly, you have the date. And again, the date varies just a little, simply meaning that if you can find more than a year, go ahead and put the full date that's available. So in this example, you can see exactly when this personal communication was posted down to the day in which that's what I'm going to include. But now let's go ahead and move on to those on-citation examples that do require reference list entries. And mind you, we have quite a few examples to go over, but I am going to note that my explanations are going to get shorter and shorter because while they're all different, you're going to see a lot of the same thing. But let's go ahead and start with a press release. And so a press release falls under the category of what APA calls gray literature. Think of things like reports where they don't fall into a traditional category of a book, a journal article. However, they're still relevant to academic writing. So for the press release, what you're going to do is include the author element as normal. You want to include the full date element, the title of the gray literature, in this case, the title of the press release, and then note how you want to include a description in square brackets. And that description, if you look down here at the example, is simply going to be press release because that's the type of source you're citing. If this were a report, you would include report for the description. Very simple. Then, if you'll note, the source element isn't very different from a traditional reference list entry in that you want to include the name of the source it came from and the DOI or URL. But this one actually makes a good point. That's kind of an umbrella general rule of thumb, and that is if you're citing a source that uses a group author. So this group author is what we're using for the author element, and then if we were to click on this, the group author is also the name of the source. So coming back here to the example, if you'll note, you would not repeat the author element and the source element if they're the same thing. So that's just a little refresher to referencing 101. But then lastly, go ahead and take a look at the in-text citation. Here we have the traditional author element, which in this case is a group author, and then the year of publication. But now let's go ahead and move on to our next example of an embedded video. And I'm going to say right now, an embedded video is going to be the most different out of all the odd citations we're going to cover today because of what an embedded video is. So an embedded video is a video that is originally published on one source and then included, aka embedded, on another source. And so that alone is why they're different because essentially you need to pay respects to both sources. But let's go ahead and look at the template and then it makes a little more sense. So for the author element, APA wants you to look for the username or screen name, which again is just a fancy way of asking who originally created this video. Next, for the date, all you need to find is the year the video was originally posted. Moving on to the title of the video, this is self-explanatory. It's the title of what the video is called. And then again, you need to include a description of the source in square brackets, which quite frankly should always be embedded in video. Now, it's the source element where things get a little wonky. So this is where you need to attribute both of those sources. So you want
The future of your business is here. With Wix, you get advanced AI capabilities.
I want to start by including the upload date. And this is going to be the original upload date. So here we have the 2nd of February. Then you need to include the words available at, followed by a colon, and a live URL. So if I wanted to look up the embedded video, I could. Lastly, you need to finish off the source with an access date. So as you can see down here, I accessed this video on the 20th of July, 2020, and I'm going to include a comma right there to make it correct. The last thing I want to point out here is that you do include a period after the access date. But now, moving down here to the in-text citation, please note that I've included both dates here. One for the video when it was published, and then 2 when I accessed it. You always want to do that anytime you have 2 years in your reference list entry. But let's go ahead and move on to the next example, which is a discussion post. This is a source that I have a lot of students ask me how to cite, so I'm happy to give you this example. But let's go ahead and go through the template. As always, you want to include the author element, the date element. For the title element, you have the title of the discussion thread, then a description, which should always be discussion post if that's what you're citing. Then the source element should be formatted like you see it is here, meaning that you want to start with the phrase discussion posted in, the name of your university, followed by Blackboard, followed by a comma, then the name of your course, followed by a period, and then ending with the URL to complete this reference list entry. So looking down here at the example, we have the author, the date. Here is the title of the discussion thread with discussion post in those square brackets for the description. Then for the source, we have discussion posted in Walden University Blackboard, comma, English Composition 1, period, and here's the live URL. But now let's take a look at the webinar example. And you know what? I'm actually going to include webinar or lecture here. But basically, you have a recorded speech somewhere online. This is traditionally where you're trying to cite a lecture or a webinar, say your professor gave it, it's uploaded on your university, and you want to cite that information in your. So here we have the author element, and in this case, you're looking for the presenter of the webinar or lecture. You have the date element. For the title, you want to include the title of the webinar, then the description in the square brackets, followed by the source location in either the DOI or URL. So this is starting to look more like our traditional reference list entries. And so coming down here to the example, this one has two presenters, so it's following reference list formatting principles for citing studies with two authors. Then you have the date, you have the title of the webinar right here. For the description, this is a webinar. If this were a lecture, you would type out lecture in those square brackets instead. And then for the source location, this is found on Royal Roads University. And of course, we have the URL right here. And if you'll take a look at the in-text citation, again, general in-text citation. However, note that there are the two authors included because there's two authors in the reference list entry. But now let's take a look at a conference session. And this is going to be fairly similar to a webinar or a lecture, but the source is going to be a little different. So again, you're looking for the presenter's information. You then have the date element, and please note how the S is included in this one. In case the conference spans a few days as opposed to one day, then you have the title of the contribution. And the reason the word contribution is included here is because the conference session could be a spoken conference. It could be a conference where you're looking at it on a poster. It could be a presentation, a PowerPoint. There's a few different variations of the type of conference. And so that's what that means. And then same, in the square brackets, you want to include the type of contribution. So that's another way of saying what is the description for this source. But now, taking a look at the source element, you want to include the conference name as well as the location. And of course, the URL if it's applicable. So let's go ahead and take a look at the example. Here we have three different presenters. Excellent. Next, we have the date element. And again, this is what it would look like if the conference spanned more than one day. So as you can see here, it was from July 12th through 15th. Got that? We have the title of the contribution. And in this case, the type is going to be a conference session. So that's what we're going to include in the square brackets. Then from there, we have the conference name, which is the Autism Society National Conference. And here is the location that the conference was held. Lastly, you have the URL to finish out this reference list entry. Then coming down here to the in-text citation, again, note how we've included all three presenters because that's what's contained in our reference list entry. By the way, if you have any questions at all about what I'm discussing in this video, don't hesitate to drop those in the comment section below because I know we're covering a lot of ground. But now, what I want to talk about is dissertations and master thesis papers because it can either be published or not published. This first one is an example of not published. So let's go ahead and start with that. I'm actually going to zoom back in so we can see the final details. The first thing we want to look for is the author who wrote the paper. Then you want to include the year the paper was published. Then you want to include either the title of the dissertation or the title of the thesis. And then for the description element, note that you are going to either use the phrase unpublished doctoral dissertation or unpublished master's thesis. For this,
Braden has amazed me. He's so strong.
the source, you're simply going to include the name of the institution awarding the degree. Since it's not published, there's not going to be a URL or a DOI link, which is why the institution or the university is completely acceptable for the source. So here we go. Let's look at the example. We have the author, the date, we have the title, and in this case, it's an unpublished doctoral dissertation. That's what we're going to include in those square brackets. And this doctoral dissertation comes from the University of Virginia, which is what we're going to include for our source. Simple enough, right? Now, let's talk about if that dissertation or thesis paper was published. So the first two elements are the same. You're looking for the author of the paper, the year the paper was published. Again, you want to include the title of either the dissertation or the master's thesis. But now, in the description section in the square brackets, things get a little bit different. So first, you want to signify if either it is a doctoral dissertation or a master's thesis, and then that's where you're going to include the name of the institution or university awarding the degree. Because for the source, you want to include the name of the database or the archive name, as well as the URL of where you can find it. So coming down here to the example, if the author, the date, the title, and in those square brackets, this is signifying that this is a doctoral dissertation that came from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Here, this is showing us the dissertation is located in ProPress and in Thesis Global. Since this dissertation is located in two different places, you don't want to include two URLs. What you would do is you would go to, say, ProQuest, and you would search for it using that title. But you guys are troopers. Let's move on to our last two examples for our odd citation tutorial, starting with a data set. And so I'm going to say right away that this one follows very traditional reference list entry principles, in that you have the author of the data set, the year the data set was published, the title of the data set. You're going to include a description of the data set, which is probably data set. If this were a different type and you wanted to distinguish between it, you can include that here as well. But then you have the name of the publisher and the DOI or URL. So like I said, very traditional references entry here, and here is the example to demonstrate it. But lastly, let's talk about PowerPoint slides or lecture notes. So here we go. All right. You have the author or the creator of either the PowerPoint or the lecture, the date information, the title of the presentation. You want to include a description to decipher what type of source this is. So in this example, as you can see, it's a PowerPoint slide. You want to include the source information. And so the reason it says source information is because the type of source will vary depending on if it's a PowerPoint, a lecture, so on and so forth. And so as you can see here, this is located at Canvas at FNU. And then lastly, we have the URL to close out the entire reference list entry. And then I just wanted to point out the in-text citation for this one as well, because I always like to include at least one example of a direct quote in-text citation in these tutorials. So let's say that you wanted to directly quote the exact words that you found on one of those PowerPoints. You can. The way you would do it is include the author, the year, and then you want to signify which slide that quote was located on. In other words, you want to include the source locator if you're directly quoting your source. All right, friends, if you're still here right now, thank you for hanging out with me through this whole video. By the way, if I didn't cover one of your references,
Okay, that's probably plenty of information in a deep dive, probably more about APA than you ever want to know. But some of you have asked those questions, so I wanted to make sure you had that information. As always, if you have questions, please give me an email and let me know what those are. And have a fantastic